Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the basics of After Effects. Now that our composition is ready, we will want to bring in something to animate. In After Effects, this is called importing an object. Go to the File menu at the top and look for Import. It's about midway down. You'll see several options, but today we are only concerned with the first two, Import File and Multiple Files. Import multiple files allows you to import something, and then it will automatically open the import window again to select the next file. It will continue to do this until you hit Done. Import File will only open the window once. I'm going to import the Mobile Mirage logo. The file will then appear in the project panel to your left. If the project panel isn't there, open the Window menu at the top and look for Project near the bottom. Click on that. This should open the window. You can put the file in your composition two ways. Either you can drag it directly into the comp, or you can drag it into the timeline at the bottom. Once it's in the composition, we can manipulate its properties in the timeline. Next to the file, on the left, you'll find a drop-down. Click it, and there should be a Transform drop-down. Click that, and you'll see a list of the properties we will be discussing. First, the anchor point. The image in the composition should have a symbol in the middle that looks a bit like crosshairs. This is the anchor point. It is usually either in the middle of the object or the middle of the composition. Its position in the composition determines what direction the scale property shrinks or enlarges from, and at the same time, what point the rotation property rotates around. The numbers next to it tell you its position in the composition, measured in pixels. This composition is 1920 by 1080, and 960 is half of 1920. 540 is also half of 1080, so it's dead center right now. The first value is the X value, or horizontal value. The second value is the Y value, or the vertical value. There is also a third value called Z for depth, but we'll cover that a little later. When you move the anchor point's value here in the timeline, you'll notice that its position on screen doesn't change, but the object's position does. That's because the object's position property is measured based on how far away it is from the anchor. So changing the value of the anchor changes the visual position based on that relationship. To change the position of the anchor on the screen without changing the object's visual position, we need to use the Pan Behind or Anchor tool. It's located at the top next to the camera. Click on this or use the shortcut Y on your keyboard. You'll notice that when you change the value this way, the position's value changes with it in order to keep the object in the same visual location on the screen. It's a bit confusing at first, since the visual location is a relationship between the two values, and not either one independently. To turn off the Anchor tool, you can click the cursor icon at the top or press V on your keyboard. This will make it easier to play with the position property, which you can do in the composition by dragging it around with the cursor, or by changing the values in the timeline. When dragging it around the composition with a mouse, if you want it to go perfectly straight in a horizontal or vertical direction, hold down the Shift key before you drag the object. Scale, likewise, can be manipulated in the timeline or in the composition. Its measure is based on percentage. 100% is the size it was first imported at. Like the other properties, it also has an X and Y value. Be careful when scaling objects to larger sizes. The quality of the image remains the same. Eventually the pixels will become obvious unless you are working with a vector object. In that case, you can turn on the Continuously Rasterize feature, which is located on the left of your layer. If you don't see it, right-click on the bar above the timeline. Go down to Columns and turn on Switches. This allows you to maintain the image quality. Some distortion effects don't play well with this feature, however, so it is best to get an image that is the right size to begin with. To maintain the proportions of the image, hold Shift while dragging out the corners of the object. In the timeline, just make sure that the chain link icon next to the scale is on. Otherwise, the X and Y values can be manipulated separately. Rotation is measured first in multiple full rotations, and then in degrees ranging from 0 to 359. Once you've hit 360, you are at one full rotation. Positive values indicate a clockwise rotation, and negative values indicate a counterclockwise rotation. The center of rotation is the anchor. Rotation only has one value unless it is turned into a 3D layer. Then it has X, Y, and Z values, along with a new property called orientation, with its X, Y, and Z values. Unlike rotation, orientation doesn't have multiples of rotation. 360 degrees in orientation is the same as 0 degrees. The orientation is only used to determine where the 3D layer is facing. Rotation is for spinning it like hands on a clock or wheels on a car. Opacity is basically the opposite of transparency. It is measured in percentage, and when it is 0%, it is completely transparent. When it is 100%, it is completely opaque. It is the only property here that cannot be measured in negatives and does not have a relationship with the anchor point. To animate any of these properties, we need to create keyframes, which you can start by turning on the stopwatch next to your layer name. That will create your first keyframe. Move the timeline and change the values to make your next keyframe, and now you finally have a basic animation. We'll discuss more about keyframes and what we can do with them in the next tutorial.